Hi, I'm Pete and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm. I have a story to tell in this video, and it's about that one time I almost died. It happened right down there. This happened in 2014. It was our second year of farming. I remember we didn't have a lot of animals yet. I think we had 3 head of cattle. We had 2 boxes full of broiler chickens and maybe 25 or so layer hens. And it was in the spring. I think it was in April. And Hillary and I had come down to the woods here to continue making firewood out of 3 maple trees, and the stumps you can see right here of those maple trees. We cut them down in the woods, we parted them into logs, and then we pulled them up the hill with a chain on the tractor out into the field to make them into firewood. Now, the importance of this place we were cutting wasn't lost on me, because I never forget where my grandfather died, which was right up there on the top of the hill. He cut a tree that was on the edge of the woods, and a limb that hang out into the field acted like a spring when the tree came down, and it thrust the trunk back into him and it killed him. And we were very near where that had happened. But the way I was almost killed is not the way you would think, not from cutting wood and having something fall on me, but rather we were out here in the field cutting up the logs into chunks of firewood. I cut into one log and the piece of firewood came free, and the log ever so slowly and gently rolled down this hill and bumped me in the shin. I didn't think anything of it. We continued cutting wood and went in for the evening, and when I changed out of my work clothes, I found I had a little scratch about that long on my shin. It looked like the kind of scratch you'd get from a berry bush. About a week went by, and one evening I was sitting at the kitchen counter with a pair of shorts on, and Hillary happened to notice that there was some redness around that little scratch, and she was alarmed. Her history being as a critical care nurse, she kind of knew what was going on, and I guess I did too, because I'd stepped on nails when I was working on the house, and one time I'd gotten an infection and it got red around the infection, so we decided that I should go to the doctor. I went to the doctor a few days later, and he drew a circle around where it was red with a magic marker because he wanted to make sure it didn't spread. He prescribed some antibiotics, and I went on my way. I felt fine. There was no pain there. Three days went by, and the redness continued to grow outside the boundaries of the marked circle that the doctor had drawn. So on a Saturday, I decided it was time to go to our local convenient care because I couldn't see my regular doctor then. Got in to see another doctor there, which I had never met before. She prescribed a different antibiotic. I got the antibiotic and went home. Still, the red spot got bigger and bigger, and I figured, well, it'll take a couple days for the antibiotic to take effect. Hillary and I were at lunch the following Monday when I started to not feel so good. All of a sudden, while I was eating lunch, I started to feel feverish. I had the chills. My heart started beating faster. I started to breathe faster. Hillary looked at me and said I looked like a ghost. All of the color had drained from my face. She was freaking out. But I wasn't. I figured I'd caught a little bug and that was it. She said, "We're going right to the doctor." This time we went to see the doctor that I'd seen the first time around. I told him about my experience at the convenient care place on that previous Saturday. He kind of scratched his head at the antibiotic I'd been put on as if to say, that won't do a darn thing. Looked at the red spot, went out to consult the other doctors that were outside the exam room, came back in and said, go to the emergency room right away. Hillary drove me to the emergency room, which is about a half hour away, and wouldn't you know it, when we got there, they were full. They brought me in and triaged me, took my vital signs, and sent me back to the waiting room. By this time I was getting really bad. I was hyperventilating, my heart was racing, I was sweating profusely. Well, little did I know that they'd sent me back to the waiting room so that they could hurry up and set up a bed in the hallway outside of the ER so they could bring me in. They brought me back to the bed that they'd set up, which was really just a couch that was kind of folded down, put a blanket on me, drew some blood, and sent it off for an expedited review. Meanwhile, I was hyperventilating. I couldn't catch my breath. It felt like I was drowning or couldn't breathe, even though I was breathing really fast. I could feel my heart pounding through my chest. The blood test results came back and I was septic. Sepsis is deadly pretty quickly. It's your body basically attacking itself, trying to kill an infection that it can't control. Your white blood cell count goes through the roof, and it's basically a last defense for your body before you die. They couldn't tell right away what I was infected with, so they just started throwing intravenous antibiotics at it, heavy doses of multiple types. I got a bed actually in the ER later that evening. It was like living through one long fever dream. I can't remember big parts of it. And talking to Hillary later on, at that point I could have easily died. My organs were starting to shut down. Hillary stayed with me until I got a room upstairs in the hospital out of the ER. At around midnight or 1 o'clock, she had to go home. We had 3 small children. And since Hillary was an ICU nurse, she had a hawk eye for how they were treating me, looking at each type of medication they were giving me, reading the blood test reports, and making sure that they weren't missing anything. I'm so thankful for that. Through the night and into the middle of the next day, my white blood cell count continued to rise. And white blood cell count is the indicator of sepsis. When that starts to go down, you start to come out of the woods. I was in the woods for a long time, but the afternoon of the second day, I started to get better. I spent a total of 4 days in the hospital, and you got to be pretty seriously sick to spend that much time in the hospital these days. During that time, they took ultrasounds of the area where the infection started. They took loads of blood tests, and they could never really figure out exactly what the infection was, but they suspected it was MRSA or something closely related to MRSA. My family came to visit me every day. Hillary was there all day. My parents came, and my 3 kids who were very little came. And I'll never forget what my son Henry gave me when he came. He was just 6 years old, and he gave me this plastic coin. Ever since the day he gave it to me, I've kept it by my bed in our bedroom. At the end of day 4, they let me out of the hospital. They took me off of the IV antibiotics. My white blood cell count had come down enough for them to feel comfortable. They gave me a slew of antibiotics to take for the next month while I was at home to make sure that the infection didn't come back. And I was really weak. Luckily, our farm was a lot smaller, and it was such that Hillary could take care of the animals, but it was still quite a load on her. When I left the hospital, I had no clue what was to come next, and that was actually the worst part of the whole thing that kept me sick for the better part of a year. I contracted C. diff. Now, C. diff is a bacteria that lives in your gut. Lots of bacteria live in your gut and help with digestion. C. diff is normally harmless, but when you take all these antibiotics and you bomb your system and it kills off all the bacteria in your gut, C. diff is one of the few that stay alive, and if you get too much of it, you get very sick in the absence of the other bacteria that normally control its population. So I started losing weight. I was tired all the time. Whatever I ate ran right through me, and it was basically kind of incurable. They would put me on a round of 1 antibiotic to take care of the C. diff. It would take care of it for a little while. It would come back. They'd put me on a different antibiotic. This took the better part of a year to finally come out of. So what happened after I recovered? Was I a changed man? In the movies, of course, the character would say, "Carpe diem, seize the day," and he would go around and hug his family and remember that every day, live life to your fullest. Well, this is real life. I didn't feel that way at all. The one thing that I did realize is that no matter what you do, and farming can be dangerous business, but all it took was a little scratch, and I could have gotten that little scratch any one of 1,000 ways on the farm. Any day you walk out your door, there's no guarantee that you're going to come home at night, and I guess that was something I knew to begin with. I've heard people say, "Oh, I had a near-death experience, and I came out with this giant revelation." Well, life just went on. I saw Kurt Vonnegut, the famous author, speak once. I was right in the front row, and he drew a line on the chalkboard, and he said, "Now, this is how a book goes. Plot goes like this. There's a climax, and then there's a down, and then there's a slight climax toward the end, and end of story." Well, this is what life is like. Blip. I think that's what happened. I wish there was a better moral to the story, but hey, it's an interesting story nonetheless. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next time.